Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're just going to give people a few minutes. I see a lot of people are slowly starting to filter in. So we'll get started in about a minute or two with today's webinar. Before we introduce ourselves and some of the tools we'll be using today, Eric and I are a little bit curious about the participants who are joining us today. So for the attendees in today's webinar, could you tell us what industry or what professional background do you work in? Can you share your responses with us in the chat while we wait for a few more people to join us? And if you're not familiar with the chat tool, it is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you scroll your mouse down, you should see a little icon there. Okay, so we have people joining us from a life science background, pharmaceuticals, education, pretty diverse batch so far. Is there anyone joining us from a marketing background? Can you please share with us in the chat if you have a marketing background? Okay, so we do have at least one participant in the marketing background. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining us today for our webinar interview. I am here with our guest interviewee today, Eric Wang. He's the CEO of a digital marketing company called Monita. Thank you very much, Eric, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so before we introduce ourselves and get started with today's interview, thank you to all the attendees who are joining us today. We really want to make this interview interactive. So I do invite you to share any questions that you have for Eric throughout today's webinar. You can use the Q&A tool, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you click on the Q&A tool, you can write any questions that you have in the Q&A box at any time. And I believe you also have the option to make your questions anonymous if you don't want to be called out in today's webinar. So please, again, if you have any questions for Eric throughout today's webinar, please feel free to speak up and share your questions at any time. We will also leave a little bit of time towards the end of our session today to do some Q&A from the attendees with Eric. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Sunny Gladish, and I am a trainer and coach at SPARKDOJO, originally from Canada, and I've been working in Tokyo for the past 5 years. Eric is joining us today. Eric, could you please go ahead and introduce yourself to our attendees?
Sure. I was born in Taiwan, but I moved to America when I was about 3 years old. Stayed in Silicon Valley, California, basically my whole life. And and then after graduating from university, I had a chance to work at Facebook for about 2.5 years, and Instagram after that for about 2.5 years too. Working in the algorithm department, which is basically analyzing everybody's actions, the billions and billions of users' actions on both Facebook and Instagram, and try to come up with a better way to increase the user experience and how they interact with our platform. So with that experience in hand, about, I think 4 years ago, I moved to Japan and started Monita as a digital marketing agency based on, you know, what I learned about, I think, people in general, right? Because social media is all about connecting people. So based on what I understand about connecting people, we started this company about 4 years ago and have been running in many different industries in Japan ever since.
All right, thank you very much. So Eric, you mentioned that you were basically born and raised in California, and you also started your career there. What was it that made you decide to come to Japan specifically, and what made you decide to establish your own company here?
One of the things that, one of the things that we're really sensitive to in the Silicon Valley growing up is to find like a special, unique point about you that nobody else has, right? And having that as a, how do you say, competitive advantage towards what your expertise is. So as I mentioned that I was born in Taiwan, so I'm completely native in speaking Chinese.
Okay.
And growing up in California, I'm also speaking English right now. So I was thinking, like, if Japan is one of the largest markets in the world, and being a center of that, you have access to the Western markets Western from the for example the Europe or like the American or Australian side. You have access to the APAC market from the Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, China. And if I can, establish myself in Japan, I will create, I think, a very special combination of expertise and communication abilities to run this kind of strategy.
Okay, interesting. So
Yep.
you have a lot of experience. Your background is both as someone from growing up from a Taiwanese family, growing up in America. I'm a little bit curious to know what has been your experience sort of working across different cultural environments, mainly your experience transitioning as a professional in the US over to Japan. Were there any learnings or challenges that you experienced through that process?
Oh, definitely. Like, first coming to Japan, like, no connections. There's no like senpai or kohai or anything like that. So the first thing that I had to focus on was just to learn the Japanese language. That's about it. The more that you can communicate someone, not just through like a conversation level, but more of a friend, and on a personal level, that really just taught me a lot about the culture itself, right? Because then I can ask people like, why is this happening? Like, what do you do in this situation? Like, ask them about how the Japanese company like hierarchy or the way they work is, and just kind of learn from many different people who are Japanese. And well, at that point, maybe I couldn't really communicate with them in English, so that created huge motivation for me to be able to communicate with them in Japanese and learn about the Japanese culture through their experiences, basically.
Okay. So I'm guessing that a lot of our attendees joining us today are probably interested in branching out and maybe working with businesses from different countries, or maybe pursuing businesses on a global level. Do you have any advice for people who are looking to do something like that?
Right. I think just speaking from my own experience, like right now, if I talk in Japanese, I think people might think I'm a Japanese American. Like, oh, you probably grew up in America, your family speaks Japanese, and maybe your Japanese is not all there yet, but yeah, I can kind of see you probably come back to Japan every summer to visit family. So that's where, if I don't tell people that I'm not Japanese, they probably think already I'm a very good Japanese speaking Japanese American, right? But it didn't start like that from day one. From day one, I think it was like really from zero, from scratch. Like, to be honest with the guests here, like I watched anime before, but I didn't really care to learn Japanese. I just read the English subtitles on the bottom, and that was good for me. So in terms of motivation wise, I think one of the biggest things is connected to my business. It connected to starting a good business. Then you're forced to do presentations, especially in Japanese, because, well, when the company that you meet, if one person doesn't speak English, then you can't do the presentation to get the contract or make the proposal, right? So the biggest thing is putting yourself in a situation, I think, where you have no choice but to speak the language to reach business or personal goals. And then at the same time, like, making mistakes, no problem. People are very, very helpful, I would say, to people who are learning a new language. So if you're trying to learn, if you're trying to show that right attitude, I think it's okay to make mistakes. People will help you just learn and improve every single time you speak, then it's just going the right direction over time. Then you'll be, doing the business you want to do overseas or anywhere.
Okay. So for you, it sounds like that language barrier and overcoming that language barrier, being able to confidently conduct yourself in a foreign language that you didn't really have a strong background in, was really core to being able to successfully run your business and set that up here in Japan.
Definitely. Like, at the very end, this is what I learned after coming here, but like there's English businesses going on in Japan, but the people who are making the decisions, the actual decision makers, they're the higher levels in the company, for example, right? Usually they're 100% Japanese. So for me to meet my goals, to be able to communicate with them, to learn from them, and to give my opinion to them, right? Not just to get something, but to offer something back. Then Japanese was an essential tool that I had to use.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like quite a challenge that you've overcome. Just having a similar experience of coming to Japan with little language knowledge, being able to, really focus on operationalizing it to the degree that you're able to conduct business successfully is quite an obstacle. And I know a lot of our attendees are challenging themselves with that right now. So Eric, I think you set a really good example for some of our followers and our members in the audience today. So let me ask you a little bit more about your company. Can you
Sure.
give us a little bit more background on Monita? Like, what do you guys specialize in? What is sort of your unique edge that you have? You mentioned earlier it's important to establish yourself as different or unique. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, of course. So like one of the biggest advantages that we have is step one will be my experience working at Facebook and Instagram. Social media, Google was a 15-minute drive from our campus, so we work with Google people all the time.
Okay.
In Palo Alto. So that I think would be our first differentiator. Like for example, our company didn't come from an agency background. We came from the tech background, the actual platform background, right? So with the algorithm runs both Google and Facebook. So if you understand how they think, then the strategies that you can provide are very straight to the point, right? We don't, our expertise is not to make something look better than it is. It's just to provide the client and reach the KPI and business goals just like that. And so the way that we set up, that's the strategy part, that's the experience part. So how do we kind of differentiate ourselves in the market is, well, in Japan, as everybody knows, there's a couple big marketing agencies, just like Dentsu, Hakodo, ADK, Cyber Agent, and so on and so forth, right? And they're very generalized. So you can, for example, if you have the budget, you can go to these companies and ask them to do anything for you, basically. So taking that from a startup point of view, like a startup who can do anything, you'd rather be a startup who can do one thing very well and scale that up. So taking that same concept, so we take our experience in marketing, and I form different departments within my company, and we focus on that specific industry, that specific market, and that specific strategy, and we build that up. So we specialize it so that no other marketing agency has this expertise that can compete with us in that field. And I think two good examples that I think will be really easy to understand today is the luxury tourism market and the wellness market here in Japan.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that as well? Like the wellness market, for example, is sort of, as we talked about before we started the interview, is sort of something that's booming now, especially after the things that have come about with the COVID-19 situation. So can you sort of give us a little bit more background on how that market works?
Yes, of course. Yep. So our wellness marketing strategy is very, how would say, it fits with the times. I would say it fits with what's happening these days in the world. And it also fits with, I think, one of the biggest problems that Japan has, because it's really easy to quit, but it's hard to find somebody that's fit your company going forward, right? So what we focus with the wellness program is we see the office as an environment, and the people working in that environment needs to have a certain level of well-being within them so that they are comfortable going to work every day, not just from a business and work point of view, but also from a health, body, health as in like body, physical health, mental health, what's a good word? Not like, well, health in terms of like you don't get sick. Yeah, so all of these things are very basically connected to what's happening with COVID-19 today. So we offer a solution where we provide, for example, like just the example we talked about before, when you go to a company, usually here in Japan, when you wash your hands, this is becoming like a standard thing, right? Before COVID-19, people don't really, I mean, you should wash your hands, but nobody really like put the focus on the washing hands.
Mm-hmm.
But washing hands now has become such a common thing. Like you have to wash it before you eat, during you eat, after you eat. When you get into the office, you got to spray your hands with the alcohol or wipe and all that kind of stuff. And the result of that is very simply dry skin, right? So dry skin, when it comes to both women and men, like it becomes like a very stressful thing when you see your hands and you see the skin gets very dry. So what we do is we'll help companies with the solution where we provide, how do you say, like soap and all that kind of like a very specialized product line, so they help their employees feel better in terms of wellness and their company every day.
Okay, that's
Yep.
really interesting, because I think that idea of like health and hand washing, this is such a basic everyday thing that most of us never really gave a second thought to until
Right.
things recently started to happen. And
Exactly, right.
It's really interesting that as a digital marketing company, that very small thing has become such a market. Eric, you were talking about a little bit earlier, to backtrack, the importance of specialization and how
Right.
that has helped you to sort of define yourselves from other big digital marketing companies. And
Right.
you mentioned that also startups can benefit from that as well. I know some of
Right.
our joiners today are joining us, and they work in various different types of startups. Do you have any advice to them in terms of what you were saying earlier about the importance of specialization? Can that apply outside of marketing as well?
Well, yeah, I think, well, of course it depends on the startup, but for example, like one area of how to run a company that's different from, for example, difference between the Silicon Valley and Japan is that in Japan you have one company that does many different kinds of businesses. If you're a real estate company, you might run buildings, you might build hotels, you might do shopping centers, you might do security, you might build trains. You do all these things within one company, right? In the US, like you have one startup focused on one technology and making that one technology take over the world, basically. So having that specialization and getting the market share, a lot of that will connect back to marketing, right? Because, well, this is just my personal experience. Of course, a lot of startups are in different situations, but for example, startups in the US, the first thing they spend budget on is marketing. Of course, development is also important too, but that and marketing is quite similar in terms of budget distribution. What I've experienced so far in Japan is that people focus a lot on the development and not so much on the how do you say, the marketing side of things. So a lot of times, like to help a startup gain the right valuation, how many people out of 1,000 people, for example, walking on the street knows about your product is a huge indicator of how investors will be affected in your valuation and how to help you get to the next round, basically. So that's what I would say, like a balance between the specialization of a product and specialization in terms of knowledge of your product in your target audience is very important at the same time.
Okay, so specialization, to generalize, specialization is something that American companies tend to focus on a lot more overall than Japanese digital marketing companies.
Right, right.
Do you think that there would be any benefits for the Japanese market if companies here started to specialize a little bit more? do you think that's a direction that maybe companies should start to take now that things, especially the online environment, is growing a lot more as many of us are staying and working at home?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you're working at home and um, how do you say? I think working at home means that you're connected to the internet, right? And when you connect to the internet, you're connecting to not just people in Japan, but you're connecting to everybody else who's connected to the internet in the world, which means because you're working at home and your medium is the internet rather than a physical office space, that, I think it's a good opportunity for people to see past the office surroundings, right? And just look into how the world thinks. And because you're not really working in a space in Japan anymore, you're connected to something that's actually connected to the rest of the world, and which means the rest of the world is kind of like your work office then, right? So then when you have that ability, to work at home, then your business ideas or something shouldn't just limit. I personally, I don't think it should be limited just to Japan. It should be, it should be same as an American startup or any Japanese startup. It should be looking towards the entire global market. And I think having the ability to work at home and just have the internet be your workspace really allows the space and time for that to happen.
I know that because things have shifted heavily to online in terms of business, advertising, sales, all of that stuff, a lot of companies in Japan, even companies that consider themselves global, they are realizing that they have a much bigger market at their fingertips or within their reach, but they don't really know how to tap into that because most of their marketing has been done through more traditional face-to-face means or maybe just on a more national level. So
Right.
do you have any advice or any tips that people should keep in mind if they are trying to tap into a more global market through online marketing practices?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I think it goes back to, for example, Facebook algorithm and Instagram algorithm, or even Google, right? What those things are is basically how people behave in different parts of the world, right? It's basically Japanese users on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or anything or Google, they have their own behavior patterns, right? However, that behavior pattern might be different than American users or users in Singapore or users in Europe or the UK. And how much of that you understand, how much of those people, for example, you see somebody's post, you see a like like a like not Japan Times, but you see how other countries write about Japan in terms of the media. You see how people react to different stuff around the world based on what they write in English in terms of how I feel. Understanding that point of view will definitely help, for example, creating the right strategy to scale your business into that specific country, right? So I think, just to summarize a little bit, the language portion, communicate portion, and understanding of the people is so important. You have to have like a blank mind when you see that, right? Because those people did not grow up in Japan. They have no idea how Japanese people feel. So if you want to take a Japanese company and go global with them, you have to just forget everything about Japan and start over from zero from that country and understand both equally. And then that will be, I think, the best balanced strategy going forward.
Okay. So in terms of like your personal experience, when you moved over to Japan,
Yep.
I'm guessing that you had to really understand the different behavior patterns or maybe some of the similarities. Was there anything surprising or anything that you noticed that was different from what you were used to working back in the US?
Let's see. So I think me coming to Japan is a little bit interesting too, because I was born in Taiwan and stayed there when I was 3, right? So my personal identity is I'm Taiwanese. However, when I moved to the US, I had to basically switch that identity to become an American. So I can switch back and forth before coming to Japan. So when I first came to Japan, I kind of reflected on that experience. So it was kind of easy for me to start from zero, basically.
Okay.
And then how do you say? So in terms of your question, like how, like what kind of hardships that I learned that's different, I think it's okay. I think okay, I'm trying to put it in words, but okay. So I think one of the biggest difference between a Japanese working environment and a US working environment is the difference. The person who stands out is rewarded more compared to like you need everybody's agreement before moving here in Japan. I think that would be the biggest difference. Like I think in terms of how people react to the idea before it changes from an idea to the actual okay from the company. For example, in Japan, you would need a lot of people's agreement before a project can be ran. However, in the US, all you need is a majority of the director's agreement. So some might disagree, but they can be overruled basically. So I think that is one of the biggest difference I've seen so far, especially when a project decided or not decided.
So I guess like the way that decisions are made and the way that people conduct their work tends to be a little bit more group oriented here in Japan, whereas it's a bit more on the individual back in the US.
Yeah, I would say definitely so. Individual, I would say more like a majority. Like some people might agree, but some people, of course, might disagree. So if you have just over, for example, 50% of the people agree, then the project can go pretty much. You can pretty much go. You don't need 100% agreement.
Understood.
Yeah.
I've got an interesting question from the audience here. I'm going to read it out just in case everyone can't see it. It says, you said that you had to adjust your identity when you moved to the US, but what did you need to change the most? How specifically did you make that adjustment? And then they give the example of observing others. Could you give us a little bit of perspective on that?
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a really great question. Thank you for that. Accent. Your accent when you talk. The biggest thing that I found that's so helpful is more than grammar and more than the words and vocabulary that you know, it's your accent of how you speak it. So when I first went to US, well, of course, I only spoke Chinese during that time. So, you know, my English it sounded like a Chinese speaking person's English, right? So that was the biggest obstacle that I had this is when I was like 3 or 4. So, but still, at that time, like your friends around you, they would say something like, wow, you know, it sounds a little bit different when he say like apple. So, I mean, then at that time I was like, okay, well, I know what apple is. So whenever I hear the teacher say apple, whenever I hear around the kids or around my friends say apple, that will be the first thing that I adjusted, changed the most. Yeah, I had to change my accent the most. So it sounded like I grew up there, right? And that was basically the same in Japan too. Like when I first came here, I might know all the words correctly, but first I had to make sure it sounded like a real like a Japanese person speaking that.
Did you feel like you received different treatment from the people that you interacted with, whether it was in English or Japanese, when you were able to adopt like a more local accent?
Definitely. It made a huge difference, right? And you know, if you say something, for example, this is my own personal experience when we went to like meetings or like nomikaya, right? One people like to say is that, oh wow, your Japanese sounds very like native. So what they say is it sounds very native. Of course, at the time there's some grammar issues and whatever, but the fact that it sounds very native, it really opened up to the communication with me just to talk to me more. And yeah, that was one of the biggest, I think, confidence booster that I had is regardless of whatever I spoke is 100% correct grammatically or vocabulary or not. But the fact is, like, a Japanese person acknowledged that whatever I said sounded like a Japanese person. That was the biggest confidence booster for me, even to this day.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think even as a Canadian, when I meet people or when I go to the US, the accent even among the locals in the US, vary a lot. And
Right.
the first things that people point out when I meet them is my accent. So, I mean, yeah, accent has such a huge impact, even within different English-speaking cultures too.
Definitely, definitely. You can tell exactly where you're from based on what you say. So I even got my LA accent, or I got my Northern California accent. Just depends on what friends I'm with. We always change it a little bit too.
So you adjust your accent to different audiences?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Even within English too, it depends on where you are. So, yep.
Sort of building off of the question that we had from our participant, aside from language itself, I work with a lot of Japanese professionals who are very fluent in English, and some of them have a very clear accent when they speak English, but they
Yep.
have little experience operating and working in a cultural environment where it's very diverse, like people coming from various different cultural backgrounds. Do you have, as someone who's experienced that even as a child, you mentioned that you didn't have to start from zero when you came to Japan because you already had that experience of learning a different culture and adapting. Do you have any advice for people from Japan who don't have that experience under their belt if they want to work in the US or in parts of Europe that are quite diverse? Is there anything that they should be aware of or keep in mind if they're attempting to work overseas?
One thing that this is my personal opinion, but one thing that I think hinders or stops a lot of people from fully understanding different culture. For example, having a really close American friend, not just well, it doesn't have to be American, but a foreign friend, for example, right? Not just on a communication level, but also from understanding and a personal level connection, right? Let's see, that is the way to make that okay, that is the most important thing in my opinion. Like to be able to not just talk with somebody about business, but actually become close friends with somebody. That is the strongest way to basically put yourself in a position to understand a different culture. And I think the way to do that is, for example, a lot of times when people talk about like when they meet a foreign person, a lot of times the conversation is comparison, right? Like compared to Japan, America is like this. Compare with Japan, like Australia's like this, and compare with America, Japan's like this. That's usually how the conversation goes. And more than that, I think it's more important to ask the person why they feel that way. So like there's no need for comparison because of course it's different. So instead of like knowing how it's different, you have to know why it's different. And when you build more knowledge on why it's different, then that's when, and you have that person tell you his or her personal experience why it's different, then that is when the friendship, for example, grows past than just business or like professional related topics.
Okay. So I guess being able to open yourself up to others and being comfortable having more personal, deeper conversations and asking these why questions can be helpful to really understand and immerse oneself if they're approaching or living in a different culture for the first time.
Exactly, right. The understanding part is a huge thing. Like there's communication, and I think there's an understanding that's a little bit the next level past that. So having the ability to communicate is, for example, step one. Then you use that ability to communicate to understand. So I think that's the next step after that.
Okay, thank you for that. That's very insightful. Eric, I have another question here from one of the audience members. They're asking more about innovation. So do you think Japan is an innovative country, for example, compared to the USA or China? Do you think that you stay ahead of new and creative trends? What do you notice there in terms of innovation?
Okay, well, I think this question kind of connects to the question in the chat too a little bit, in terms of like what Japanese companies are utilizing or not utilizing for marketing tools.
Mhm.
So that's a great question though. So I'm gonna try to connect these two a little bit. Japan is a very innovative country. However, the innovation areas is a little bit different, right? For example, the US is really innovative
Mhm.
to on digital tools like apps and technology and software, basically, right? That's why you have apps like Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. Now recently Uber Eats. Then you have Spotify. Or Spotify's from Europe, but but they're really good at creating the software sense.
Mhm.
And so America is very uh, innovative for software. Japan, I would say not so much because, for example, the same hardware, a lot of Japanese companies can build the same type of computers that Apple built in terms of specifications. And the only thing difference is, for example, they're using Windows, right? And they're not using their own iOS. So the hardware might be great, but then the software inside, they're still using Microsoft or well, Apple's Apple, right? So and Apple created their own iOS, Mac OS compared to that. Japanese phones, for example, they use Android, which is a US software, and compared to Apple, or compared to Apple, which build their own, or Google that doesn't even build phones that much, but they build a software that runs on every phone in the world. So I think that's the difference between US and Japan, first of all. So in terms of China, that's really interesting too. I think China, what they're really innovative is doing something at a cheaper price. So I don't think China is very innovative in terms of creating new hardware or new software. I don't think they're good at that at all in innovation wise. But they're good at taking what's been built already, but doing it at a lower cost compared to its competitors and get a bigger market share like that. And I think those three things are the difference between how the US is innovative in terms of software, Japan is really innovative in terms of hardware,
Mhm.
and China is very innovative, not specifically in hardware or software, but to just take what's out there, but doing it cheaper, and it's about the same quality in a sense.
Okay. So basically, they're all innovative, but they're innovative in different ways and in different.
Exactly, right,
Okay. Because
right.
a lot of the people that I train with, a lot of Japanese professionals, they mention that Japan needs to be more innovative. But what does that mean? Japan needs to be innovative or more innovative. Is that something that you support, Eric? Do you think Japan needs to be more innovative, or do you think they're already innovative in their own way? As you mentioned before, they definitely have a strength in hardware. But what about other different types of business ideas and technology and sort of on a wider scale?
Well, I think that's a great question because going back to I think in the chat there was a question about, like, for example, the social media digital marketing, right?
Mhm.
So digital marketing, to be honest, like that should be where the innovation goes next. And digital marketing is basically, so Japanese companies, Japanese manufacturers, Japanese industry, they're so good at creating like technology and hardware, for example, and things that you can touch and you can see, compared to any other country in the world. However, because digital marketing is a little bit lagging in Japan, they're not enough people know what's the concept between this product, what's the concept behind, like, why this product is designed this way, why you know why did this company make this product to help this to solve this problem, right? There's not enough of the branding sense that comes behind it, and the, how do you say, the passion and the logic, and yeah, I mean, the reason why this product is designed. So through digital media, right? Because other countries don't watch Japanese TV shows, right? So through digital marketing, how much of this product is explained and communicated with the rest of the world, so that the rest of the world knows, like, wow, Japan just didn't build this product for just because for no reason. They had reason A, reason B, reason C to solve this problem A, problem B, problem C. That's why they created product A, product B, product C. And if they understand that more, they'll understand Japanese innovation a lot more at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier, how in terms of like understanding people's behavior, right?
Yep, you're right.
If you don't understand the behavior of the markets outside your sort of bubble or inside of Japan in this case, it's difficult to reach beyond that in an effective way. Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
I mean,
so, yep.
just on that one point, like, just want to say, like, before, I mean, you know how there's like a Forbes top 50 company list in the world?
Yeah.
So I believe, and if the audience has, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the top, in the top 100 companies list, the first Japanese company that shows up is like number 43 or 49, and that's Toyota.
Okay.
For a country as large market size with that much skilled, specialized like people, that much big industry, and in a very like strategic position, there should be many more Japanese companies in the top 50 ranks in the world compared to right now. Which, coming to Japan, what I learned is that there are super innovative companies in the world. It's just that the rest of the world doesn't know about it, right? And that's where it's really hard to compete with other companies around the world if the regular people, right, the branding side, and people don't really know about it. And the result is the first company on that list is Toyota, and they're still like number 40 something. There's 50 companies in the world that's even better than Toyota in that sense. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's some really valuable insight. So again, that idea of getting the products out there and being able to reach beyond borders and sort of the culture of just Japan, right? Very important to keep in mind. All right, so we're coming to sort of the end of the time that we have allotted for today. There were a couple of questions from the participants, but if there are any other questions, I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to please send them into the Q&A. But Eric, it's been a pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you so much. I know that you're probably very busy. Looks like you're sitting in your car.
Yeah, my mobile office, right.
All right. Do you have any final words or comments or questions for the audience today before we start to wrap things up?
Well, first of all, like Japan is a really great place to work. It's so many opportunities, and I think going forward, especially with well, Olympics might or might not happen next year, but I think Japan is on a really big, I think, shift in terms of, for example, people like me can come in and run a successful business in the digital marketing space in less than 4 years, and Japanese companies, Japanese people, and have embraced, like, for example, a foreigner to work here and to how do you say, to join their forces together and knowledge and experience together to create something new. So I think yeah, it's definitely the next couple of years in Japan is going to be quite exciting, and I'm really excited to be part of that.
Yeah, a lot of exciting changes to look forward to.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Eric. Before you go, one of our participants is wondering if you're joining us from Tokyo.
Yeah, I'm actually in Yokohama right now. Like I'm joining like WeWork, so we like to, my team and I would like to switch different WeWorks around to work just to change up the scene a little bit.
Okay.
So right now I'm in Yokohama, and there's a new place called the Hammerhead, which I really recommend. It's a really nice place to, there's like shops and there's a hotel on there. It's right next to the ocean. So yeah, it's close to the WeWork here in Minato Mirai too. So that's where I'm working. Okay,
very cool. That sounds nice. All right, let's wrap things up for today. Thanks again, Eric. Really appreciated your time and great insights that you have. I'm sure that we all learned a lot today from your insights, so really appreciate that. Take care of yourself and have a good afternoon in Yokohama.
Great, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for your time too.
All right, thanks everybody for joining. Have a good day and take care.